Hello guys, welcome to the next session of implementing CRUD operations using Angular version 16. In the last session we discussed on how we can implement this employee creation form into our Angular 16 project, and alongside we have seen that how we can make make a post request to the APIs that we have already implemented. In this session we are going to work on a select operation, that is a get request operation. So we are going to create one button on this employee creation form, and whenever we will click on this button, which is having the name like go to employee list, whenever we will click on this, it will just take us to the new page and we will be able to see the details of all the employees that we have currently into the database. So for this we are just going to use Angular material table, and this is how we are just going to show the data. And there will be one button also. Whenever if you just want to go back to the employee creation form, you can just click on this button and we can just come back to the employee creation form. One more thing that we are just going to implement is, let's suppose if I'm just creating one new record, for example something like this. Let me just put some random details and let me just put address, and let me just give some details over here. So whenever we will click on this save button, what it will just do, if all the details are saved successfully into the database, then it will automatically take us to the new page that we have just implemented. So whenever we will click on save, then it will just take us to the new page where we have all the employee details, and the new record that we have just created is we will be able to see this new record also. So this is the page that we are going to implement in this session. So let's see how we can work on this session. So now I'm in the Google Chrome, and this is the form that we have implemented in the last session itself. So now what we want to do is we want to create one new component where we can show the table. So let's see how we can create the component also, and then we want to give one link at maybe at this top, so that whenever we will click on this link, then we can we will be redirecting to the new component. So for that, let's go to the VS Code, and over here let me just open one new terminal, and let me just write one command in order to create a component, which is ng-gc, and then let me just give the name of the component as employee dash list, so that it by the name it will suggest like it is going to show the employee list. And now the component is created. The next thing that we have to do is we have to configure a path for this component. So let me just open app routing module ts file, and let me just copy this path and let me just paste it something like this. Let me just give the path as employee dash list, and component will be like employee list component, something like this. Now let me just restart the application, and let me just take you to the Google Chrome. And over here what we have to do, on the top of this form, maybe in this section, in this right hand side section, we can give one button, so that whenever we will click on this button we can go to the new component. So in order to do this, I'm just going to use a button. So we have already implemented the button, so we don't have to again import it in our project. We can just directly use it. So let me just click on this view code, and I'm just going to use this mat raised button. So let me just copy this button code, and let me just come back, and let me just go to the employee component, and inside the employee.component.html, and before this form let me just give one division, and let me just paste this particular button. Let me just save it. Let's see how it looks like. So as of now it is looking like this. So it is not looking quite good. So what we have to do, we have to just cut this button and we have to paste it before our card starts, something like this. And yes, now it is looking perfectly fine. So I want to change the text. So let me just change the text to go to employee list, something like this. Yes, and I just want to change its alignment. I just want it to the right hand side section. So what we can just do, we can just align, we can just give one property which is align is equals to maybe right, something like this. And yes, now it is looking perfectly fine. The only thing is the distance inside distance within this button and this form, maybe in the card, it looking quite large. We can just try to reduce it. Instead of this empty 5, we can just try to make it as empty 2, and yes, now it is looking perfectly fine. Now whenever we will click on this button, we just want it to go to the new page. So over here what we have to do, we have to just give router link is equals to, and the link will be our like our path of the new component. In my case it is employee list. So let me just copy this and let me just give it as a slash employee list, something like this, and let me just refresh it and let me just click on it. Yes, now we are going to the new component whenever we are clicking on this button. So it is working as expected. The next thing that we want to do is we have to like design one table on this, but before designing the table I just wanted to show you how our API looks like. I mean how the data from the API comes. So let me just take you to the Postman, and this is the API that we have already created, and if you just see in the output, you will be able to get like all the list of employees that we have, something like this. Now exactly same API we want to use it on our Angular side, and in this way we are going to get the output. So first of all what we can just do, we can just first of all use this API, and maybe we can just try to use console.log, and we can just try to first of all print the output on the console, and once we get the output and once we are able to use the API in our Angular project, then we can just try to embed the table also. So for this, let me just go to the VS Code and let me just close all these files, and over here let me just go to the employee list, and inside the employee list .component.ts file, first of all let me just try to create constructor, something like this, and we need ng on init also. So let me just use implements on init interface, and what we can just do, we can just click on quick fix and we can implement the on init, something like this, and we can just remove this code like this. Now over here first of all we can just go to the employee service. So over here we have one file employee.service.ts. In this file we are going to like keep all the employee related services. So we can just create one new function which is like public get employees. This function is going to return us observable of employee list. So over here we have to use employee list because we have like multiple employees, and then what we have to do, we have to just write return this .http client dot get, and then over here we have to just give the return type. In my case it is employee list, and then we have to give the API. So in my case the API is like we have to give the backticks, and we have to just use dollar, we have to use interpolation basically, this dot API, then slash get slash employee, something like this. Let me just verify whether my API is correct or not. So it is slash get slash employee. Yes, so make sure like you are giving correct spellings and everything. Now let me just go to the employee list component TS. Over here we have to inject employee service. So let me just inject employee service, something like this, and then we can create one new function get employee list, and as of now it will return void, something like this. And then what we can just do, we can just call our service function. So we can just use this dot employee service dot get employee, and then over here we have to subscribe. Now in the Angular 16, the syntax, or maybe the way we in which we use subscribe method is quite different, and in the earlier versions, maybe before Angular 15, it was the syntax was quite different, and after the Angular 15 the syntax got changed. So over here inside the Angular 16 we have to use curly brackets, and then we have to first of all give the next colon, and then over here we have to give a callback for success response. So we can just give response is equals to employee list, something like this, and then we have to give callback function, something like this, and maybe we can just use console.log res like this. And then for error response we have to give error colon, and then we can just give err, which will be of type HTTP error response. And maybe for error also we can just use console.log err, something like this. And now our method is ready. We have to just call this method from our constructor. So let me just use maybe in the constructor or maybe in the ng on init. So let me just try to call it from constructor itself, this dot get employee list, something like this. And let me just save these changes, and let me just come back to the Google Chrome, and let me just open the console. Let's see whether we are able to get the response or not. I have already started my IntelliJ, I have already started my Spring Boot project, so all the APIs are up. So now if you just see on the console, if you just refresh it on the console, you will be able to get the 3 different records. And the reason is because we have 3 records only into the database. That is the reason we are getting these 3 different records. So now our API is working as expected. The next thing that we have to do is whatever we are getting on the API, on the console, we have to embed this into the table. So for this, again, we are going to use Angular material table. So in order to do this, what we can just do, we can just go to the official site of Angular material, and then over here what we can just do, we can search for table. You will find the basic example of the table, basic use of this table and mat table. You can just copy it, copy the code from here also, or maybe you can just go to the examples, and over here also you will find the same example. So inside the example, let me just click on view code. As of now I'm just using basic table itself. I'm not using any, like, there are multiple examples, but I'm just using the very first basic table. Let me click on view code, and then over here very first thing is, like, we have to write some code in the HTML. We have to write some code in the TS file also. CSS is quite optional. If you just want, you can just give, or else if required we can just give, or else we can avoid, but HTML and TypeScript are important. So let me just copy this HTML code entirely, and let me just come back to the VS Code, and let me just open employee list.html, and then let me just paste this particular code. Now we must be getting some error, but as of now we don't have to worry about the errors, because in a moment we are just going to resolve all these errors. So if I just go now to the Google Chrome, so we are getting some errors over here. The very first error that we are getting is all about this data source, because we have to provide a data source, and then after providing the data source we have few more things to configure. So first of all, let me just remove this property as of now, and let's refresh it. So as of now again we are not getting anything, so let me just keep it as it is. And the next thing that we can just do, we can just go to this site again, and then we can just go to the TypeScript file, and then over here what we have to do is, first of all we have to copy these displayed columns array. So these displayed columns is nothing but whatever columns you are getting on the table. So those column names we have to give inside this array. Now let me just copy these displayed column names, and let me just come back to the VS Code. Let me just come back to the employee list component TS, and then over here we have to, like, paste these. Now we have to give all the column names that we are going to use inside these. So let me just come back to the Postman, and what I'm just going to do is, I'm just going to use these keys as a as a column names itself. So employee ID, if you just want, you can just copy it from the console again. Like whatever we are getting on the console, you can just copy it from there also. So we can just first of all copy the employee ID, then we have to give employee name, then we can just give employee contact number, then we can give employee address, and then we can give maybe employee department, something like this, and lastly we can just give employee gender, and then only one property is left back, which is employee skill, something like this. And let me just give the employee skills also. Now what we have to do, we have to just come back to the before, like we have to like give the data source. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create one data source over here. So let me just give the name as data source, something like this, which will be of type employee list, and let me just initialize it with a empty list, something like this. And now inside my this get employee list function, what I will just do, I'll just use this dot data source is equals to res, something like this. And now what we have to do, we have to just copy this name and we have to come back to the HTML and we have to like give this name over here, something like this. So let me just copy the name and let me just paste it over here, something like this. And now we should not be getting any issues. So let's see. Okay, so still we are getting some issues. The reason is maybe like what it is saying, can't bind data source since it is uh, it is not known property of the table. So the reason is we have left back one more thing, like we have to just go to the API and we have to like import these mat table module. So we have to copy this line and then we have to come to the app.module.ts file and then we have to paste it and then we have to copy this name and we have to give it inside the imports array, something like this. Now let's see what is happening on the UI. So yes, now all the errors are resolved, but we are getting some issues on the console. So let's see how we can like one by one resolve those errors. So what we have to do, we have to come back to the HTML file, and over here if you just see, we have these column configurations inside the HTML file. So what we have to do is, let me just remove this comment. So there are 4 columns basically that that are already there, but we have to change a configuration for them. So for this, first of all, let me just count the number of columns that we have. So we have this employee ID, name, then contact number, 4, 5, 6 and 7 columns. So we have in total 7 columns. So that is the reason we have to like create these 7 columns. We have already created 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So we have to create 3 more. So let me paste this code 3 more times, something like this. Now let me just format this document, and now one by one we have to change all the properties. So for very first column we have to give employee ID. So let me just copy my column name, employee ID, and let me just paste it over here, something like this. We can change the number to the employee ID, or maybe we can just give it as a ID itself, and then we have to give element dot employee ID, something like this. Now let me just copy the employee name and let me just give it to the column definition. We can keep it as a name itself and we can just give it as a element dot employee name. Then the third, we have to give a contact number. So for column definition, let me just give the contact number. Over here, let me just give column name as contact, and then we have to give element dot contact number. So these basically, this particular property that I have just highlighted, you can give any name to this because it is like, it is just a text that it is going to show on the top of table header. But these particular properties like column definition and this element dot employee contact number, make sure like you are just giving exactly same as the properties that you are receiving inside your that you have defined inside your employee like inside your employee interface, because those are really important properties, right? Now after contact number we have to give address. So let me copy it and let me just paste it to the column definition. Let me just give it as address. Let me just give it as element dot employee address. Next property that we have is employee department. Let me just copy it. Let me just paste it over here. Let me just make it as department and let me just make it as employee dot employee department. And now we have gender and skills. So we can just copy employee gender. We can just paste it gender and we can just give it as a element dot employee gender, something like this. And lastly we have skills. So let me just copy employee skills. Let me just paste it we can just give name as skills, and then we have to give element dot employee skills, something like this. And now let me just save all these changes. And if you are just wondering from where this displayed column property is binded, so we have created this displayed column and this property is binded on line number 41 over here, something like this. Now let me just save these changes. Let me just come back, and now if you just see, we are getting all the data and we are getting table in a exactly the same, in a exactly way that we want. The only one thing is I just want to keep some margin from left and right hand side. So what we can just do, we can just maybe take this entire table inside the container. So what we have to do, we have to like open one division, and then we have to give a class as container, something like this. So container is basically a bootstrap class, and we can just close this division at the end. We can just format this document, and let me just save this. And yes, now it is looking perfectly fine. The next thing that I just want is I just want some margin from the top because it is like very close to the navigation bar. But one more thing that we have just left back is, like, as we have created one button on this employee creation form, so we have created one button to go to the employee list. Similar button that we want on the top of this particular table, so that we can go back to our employee creation form itself. So over here what we can just do, we can just create that button. So in order to do this, we can just go back to the Google Chrome again, and then let me just go to the button section, and let me just click on view code, and let me just copy this button code. I'm just using mat raised button, and let me just paste it inside the container itself, something similar, but we can just take one division and then we can just paste these. Let's see how it looks like first of all. So yes, it is looking perfectly fine. And then we can just go to the we can just write one text like go to employee form, something like this. And then over here we have to give router link. So we have to give router link is equals to, and then we have to give a path. So in my case, the path of employee creation form is it is slash employee. So let me just copy this path and we can just give slash employee, something like this. And if I just click on this, yes, now it is looking perfectly fine. I just want some gap in between these button and this table. So what I can just do, I can just come back to this table, and then over here for the table I can just apply one class which is nothing but empty dash 3, something like this. Let me just save these changes. Okay, so empty dash 3 we can't assign it to the table. So one thing that we can just do, we can just assign one class to this button, and we can just make it as a mb dash 3, something like this. And yes, so mb is nothing but a margin bottom. So what we are just doing from this button, we are just putting some margin at the bottom from this button. And yes, it is looking perfectly fine. Now one thing that I just left back is, let's suppose if I'm creating a form, if I'm creating one employee, and whenever I'm clicking on this save button, what I want is, I want this, like after saving the employee properly into the database, I just want that it should automatically redirect it to our like our this particular page. So for this what we have to do, we have to like just go to the, we have to like go to the employee component. So employee component.ts file, and then over here what we have to do, we have like save employee function. Inside the save employee, whenever we will get the success response, in that case I just want that this I just want like it should automatically redirect to the our new component that we have just created. So in order to do this, what we have to do, we have to just first of all inject a router. So we have to inject a router, something like this. And then what we have to do, we have to just write this dot router dot navigate, and then over here we have to just pass our like employee dash list, something like this. and let me just save these changes. Let's see how it looks like. So let me just put some details over here. So let me just put some details like let's suppose, and let me just put some details randomly, and address will be like, let's suppose this one, and department is network, mail, and Angular. Let me click on save. Yes, now it is like redirecting to the new page. And then over here, if you just see, we got the new entry, which is something like this. So this is how we can design one page in order to show all the employee details onto the table. So I hope you got the idea like how you can use Angular material table inside your Angular project. So if you still have any questions, let me know into a comment section, and I will try my best to help out in that case. I hope you enjoyed this session. I'll see you in the next session.